Today, we're honored to be talking to Carl Erskine. Carl's a former starting pitcher with the Brooklyn Dodgers and Los Angeles Dodgers from 1948 through 1959. He was a pitching mainstay on the Dodger teams that won 5 National League pennants, peaking with a 1953 season which he won 20 games and set a World Series record with 14 strikeouts in a single game. He also pitched 2 no-hitters, as well as winning the World Series in 1955 with the Brooklyn Dodgers. So, here's Carl.
All right. Thank you. I really appreciate you letting me call you.
Well, my pleasure to speak with you, especially we're all on lockdown. Any news from the outside is welcome.
Absolutely. Could you tell me when you were coming out of high school, we're going back, and World War II was going on, how did you end up getting involved in professional baseball?
Well, I'd been scouted in high school by several teams. The Dodgers were prominent in those years of my high school, following the scout named Stanley Fiesel out of Indianapolis, scouted me, and my catcher in high school was also a good prospect. So he followed us playing our high school games. And then when I graduated, they sent us, the 2 of us, to Brooklyn to work out with the Dodgers for a week. So that was the final blow for me. I didn't care to play with anybody else after that experience. So then I got drafted into the Navy immediately after that in 1945. I went in the Navy for a couple of years, and the war finally ended. And then I got out, and I signed with Mr. Rickey in 1946. In fact, I was still in the Navy when he signed me. The season was about over, but I went out and played about a month with Danville, Illinois, which was a 3-eye league in those days. And then the season ended, and the commissioner called me to Cincinnati to his office, he and my dad. He said he's going to declare me a free agent because Mr. Rickey had signed me before I got my discharge from the Navy. And he said they violated my directive, but there was ambiguity sort of in my wording, so I'm not going to bar the Dodgers from re-signing it. And so I was free to sign anybody. And the Red Sox offered me a good contract, the Phillies, but I wanted to play for the Dodgers. And so I told Mr. Rickey, I'm not going to sign with anybody. I'd like to re-sign with the Dodgers. He'd give me a bonus when he signed me. Before I got out of the Navy, he gave me a $3,500 bonus. Well, there was no bonuses paid in money in those days. You might get a set of golf clubs or something, but you didn't get any money. But he offered me money because the Braves had also tried to sign me. In my Navy days, I spent part of them in the Boston Navy Yard and worked out with the Braves, which, believe it or not, were in Boston at that time, before Milwaukee and then before Atlanta. But I re-signed with the Dodgers, and then I went out to Danville, Illinois to play the full season. Then Mr. Rickey wanted me to go to Cuba and play in the Winter League, which I did. And then I came back, and they moved me to Double-A. And halfway through that season, they called me to the Dodgers. So you're asking, in a way, why did you only spend a year and a half in the minors? And my best guess is this. I did have a good throwing arm. I had a good live fastball. And I learned a lot in Cuba playing in what was about probably Triple-A. You still there?
I'm still here. Yes, sir.
Okay, I heard a click.
Nope, I'm here.
I wasn't sure. Anyway, well, Mr. Rickey, I learned this later. Mr. Rickey, in his aptitude for spotting the talent that he wanted to sign, he always said this: anybody in the ballpark going to a high school game or a semi-pro game, you can always tell who the stars are. And if there's an exceptional player, everybody in the stands knows who it is. So there's no secret to scouting. But when I scout a raw, talented player, I want to know, does he have any aptitude to embellish or refine that rough exterior of just raw talent? Or is he always going to be just a raw talent player? I want the player who can embellish his skills and can learn, and then he can have as a pitcher, he can have such a variety of pitches to pitch to these good hitters in the big leagues. Well, I learned years later that Mr. Rickey, I talked to some of the scouts later in my career with the Dodgers. He said, Mr. Rickey likes you because he could teach you something and you pick it up quick. And that was true. I had a good live fastball, but they showed me an overhand curveball. I picked it up pretty quick. And then they showed me an off-speed pitch, and I picked it up quick. So what I didn't realize is Mr. Rickey moved me up fast because I learned quickly in the minors, and so he actually leapfrogged 200 pitchers in the Dodgers system and brought me up. After he signed me in 46, I was in the big leagues in 48.
That's amazing.
So that was amazing, and I didn't realize that as a young player until years passed. And I heard Mr. Rickey interviewed one time, and he said, "What do you like about this boy, Erskine? He's not real big." And Mr. Rickey said, "He's big enough. He's 5'11", 165. That's big enough." They said, "Well, you must have liked him real well because you paid him a bonus when he got discharged because of an infraction in signing before he got out of the Navy. Then what else do you like about him?" And then he said this, and I'd never heard him say this before. This is 50 years after the fact. He said, "This boy can learn anything you can teach him."
Wow.
And so that's the reason I'm sure that Mr. Rickey saw the potential. He loved to have a hard-throwing pitcher who could finesse as well. Could take something off the pitch, could change speeds on the curveball, and I could do all those things as a young pitcher. So he didn't hesitate to move me right up real fast. So that was my best guess.
Now, you said you played in Cuba, so you played with some of the great Negro League players. You played
Right.
for Martin Dihigo, correct?
Yeah, right. I played in Havana in a 4-team league in a stadium. We played we played 2 games a week and a doubleheader on Sunday. Just a 4-team league. And I pitched I probably pitched 200 innings in that winter league. And I worked on my overhand curveball. And by the time I came back, be the spring of 48, and I was throwing that curveball in the inter-squad games in spring training, and the coaches all ran over to the bench. "Where'd you get that curve? You didn't have it last year. Where'd you get that?" I did develop a real good overhand curve, and that got me to the big leagues quick.
Do you remember any other players in Cuba that maybe people would not know about? Well, Max Manning is one.
Max Manning was one. He was on our team, and I got to know Max as a friend during about 4.5 months in Havana. Well, our shortstop was Silvio Garcia. Now, he was a big, well-built man and had real good power. He was on Mr. Rickey's list looking for the black player to break the major league barrier on segregation, and but he was 36, I think. We had a catcher on another team there. No, he's okay. He brought up by the Giants. Darn it! You caused me to reach. I smell wood burning. I'm trying to remember.
Well, you refreshed my memory because I was able to speak to Bob Kendrick, who is the president of the Negro League Museum, about 2 weeks ago, and he had told me about all these great players. And when I saw that you played in Cuba, I was like, oh, I put 2 and 2 together. So no pressure.
The Giants catcher, I'll remember his name in a minute, but he's a big guy from the Giants. He came up the big leagues, and there were others who came up and maybe went back with other teams, but I never played with any of those Cuban players with the Dodgers. Barnhill was a pitcher. He came up, but I don't know. I don't remember what club he went with. And the reason he was successful in Nevada because he cheated. He scuffed the ball some way. But when he got the big leagues, he didn't stay too long. But yeah, there were Noble. You would pronounce it in English Noble.
Mm-hmm.
Was a catcher, big, strong catcher. And he came up and played in the big leagues a season or two with the Giants. And those I remember. But, I would say my judgment tells me that league in Cuba and Havana was about AAA level. There's really some good Cuban players in that league. And pitching in that league as a young, I was just 19, turning 20 when I went to that league, and pitching in at that level. Lefty Gomez was our manager, the famous Yankee pitcher, and you know, he was a fun guy to play for. But I was wanting him to teach me some things as a pitcher. But he wasn't a teacher type. He just had a lot of fun with life. He was always doing something crazy. But I did learn a lot on my own in that league. And we had a third place finish out of 4 teams. My record was 9-7, but I pitched a lot of innings. And so I won 9 games in a short season in what I would consider AAA baseball. So when I came back to spring training in 48, I really benefited by that season in the winter season in Havana. And so I had a real good spring training. And I went to Fort Worth, Texas, AA. So I started at Class B, which was 2 notches from the bottom in those days. And then after the winter season, I jumped all the way to AA. And halfway through that season, I was called up to the Dodgers. So yeah, Mr. Rickey leapfrogged me over about 200 pitchers. Right.
So that was 1948 is 1 year after Jackie Robinson debuted.
Right. Yes.
And you had already been around integration in your hometown, correct?
Oh, sure. Yeah, it was Indiana was just like the rest of the South. It was black and white, and you knew where to go and where not to go. I did grow up with a youngster named Johnny Wilson, who was a super athlete, and he and I, about 10 years old each, in the 4th or 5th grade, we played sports together, basketball, baseball, all the way up through high school. And we both ended up, he ended up signing, he was Mr. Basketball in the state of Indiana, and he was a jumper. He had great leap and timing. And in a day when scoring more than 50 points was unusual, our team used to score 60 points, and Johnny would score 30 of them.
Wow.
So when he got out of high school, named Mr. Basketball, state of Indiana, he went to college, was an All-American at Anderson University right here in my hometown. And then he signed with the Globetrotters. He played with them, and then he signed with the American Giants in Chicago in the Negro League. He played first base. So I grew up with Johnny. He was a close friend, and we didn't have any. We didn't know what segregation meant. I mean, he was my buddy. I'd eat at his house. He'd eat at my house. We'd go to the movie on Saturday, see a cowboy show, and Johnny couldn't sit on the main floor. Now, this is Anderson, Indiana. He couldn't sit on the main floor because blacks were not permitted to sit on the main floor. So Johnny and I and a couple buddies, we'd sit in the balcony with Johnny. And so that experience was really, I don't know how you would say it, was kind of preparation, really, for meeting and playing with Jackie. And so I didn't have any problem with that. And one day Jackie asked me, he said, why didn't this bother you, this black and white thing? Well, I said, I grew up in a mixed neighborhood. I knew a lot of black families were hardworking people. And in those days, that was been in the 1930s and early 40s, everybody was poor after the Depression. So I didn't have any problem with, I respected a lot of black families. And so I told Jackie, you know, this didn't mean anything to me. And he was amazed with that. I said, well, you got to realize something, Jackie. Everybody with a white skin is not your enemy. There's a lot of people like me. I know you're doing the right thing, and you'll be successful. And there's a lot of people think that, but they don't step out in front and wave the flag. Well, he said something to me that was unexpected and very insightful. He said, well, Carl, bigots come in all colors. Now, you don't hear that side of the aisle speak that way much. And Jackie was intelligent, he was fair-minded, and he was curious of why this didn't seem to bother me. And I said, Johnny Wilson's the reason. So my disappointment is because of our travel schedule and because of Johnny's experience in sports, we were never together much the next few years. I never got to introduce Johnny to Jackie Robinson, and I'm disappointed in that. But anyway, real quickly, I went to Fort Worth, Texas, that spring of '48, and the Dodgers came to Fort Worth to play their affiliate, a AA affiliate, and I pitched 5 innings that day. And after the game, Robinson came over to our dugout and asked for me by name. Shocked me because I didn't know Jackie at all. So I shook hands with him, and he said, young man, I hit against you twice today. You're not going to be in this league very long. Sure enough, I won 15 games at Fort Worth by mid-July, and they called me to the Dodgers. And the first guy to my locker when the team bus got there was Jackie. And he shook my hand again, and he said, I told you, you couldn't miss. So that's how I met Jackie, and that's how a real good friendship developed, even though we were just teammates. But we did a lot of things off the field together and became good friends.
Awesome.
But Jackie initiated that meeting, and he didn't have to do that. And in fact, he had just had his rookie year and was voted Rookie of the Year. But almost all players have to play the second season, even if they had a real good rookie year. You haven't proven yourself yet. And they often said that sophomore year is a killer for most players. They had one good year, but they couldn't repeat it. So Jackie hadn't played his second season yet, but he put himself out to talk to some rookie kid that he didn't know. Gave me a real boost.
I was looking back at some of the players that you faced and pitched against, and the names are amazing. Mantle, Yogi Berra, Willie Mays, Ralph Kiner, Stan Musial. You can keep going. When you're out there pitching and you look in and you see, Ralph Kiner, at the time, do you take a deep breath and say, oh wow, it's Ralph Kiner or Stan Musial, and I got to bear down here? I mean, how did you handle moments like that?
Well, I don't think it was ever a situation where I feared the batter. I certainly respected the batter, and I did face a lot of the best hitters, Hall of Famers. In fact, you mentioned Kiner. Pittsburgh had a tail-end club, but they had a tough club to pitch against because they had 2 or 3 home runners hitters besides Kiner. And Kiner didn't treat me very well. I know he hit 1 grand slam off of me, and I think late in his career he hit a second one. But Musial, when Stan died a couple of years ago, a fan called me who was into stats, and he said, Carl, you played 12 seasons, a big league. Who do you think you faced the most times? I said, I don't have a clue. Well, he said, I looked it up. You pitched over 300 innings against the Cardinals, and you faced Stan Musial 164 times.
Wow.
I said, really? Well, I had a good record against the Cardinals, but but Musial always got his hits. And the best thing is to keep a couple guys ahead of Musial off the bases. And then when he hits a double, it doesn't hurt you. But you got to bear down on the guys ahead of him, because guys like Musial, they're going to get their hits. And he did. I know his stats because this guy gave them to me. He said you pitched 164 times at bat with Musial. In all those times at bat, I only struck him out 4 times. He always got his bat on the ball someplace.
Wow.
He was a really tough out. And he hit me the league average, 331. And yet my record against the Cardinals was 23-8 because I got the two guys ahead of Musial was Shandis and Slaughter. Shandis led off, Slaughter hit second, and then Musial. So you're lucky to get out of the first inning with the Cardinals.
3 Hall of Famers.
3 Hall of Famers in a row. But the advice I got from Hugh Casey, an old pitcher with the Dodgers when I joined them, he said, bear down on these guys ahead of the good hitters, because the good hitters are going to hit you just like they hit the rest of the league. So, boy, that was great advice. To be sure you keep people off the base ahead of the good hitter. Don't wait to bear down on the good hitter. Bear down on the people in front of him. That was excellent advice to a young pitcher.
Mm-hmm. Now, you obviously everybody knows you pitched 2 no-hitters. 1 is amazing enough, but 2 is off the charts. And the first one, or one of them, was against the Giants, who again had really good hitters: Willie Mays, Al Dark, and Dusty Rhodes, and others. When you're in the middle of a no-hitter, what is it running through your head?
No, it's not, because you pitch it. How do you pitch a no-hitter? 1 pitch at a time. And a no-hitter is a strange animal. There's been some of the greatest pitchers not pitch a no-hitter. There's been some kind of unknowns who have. So they're kind of a strange animal. But the Dodgers had 2 things that any pitcher would beg to have: offense and defense. They could do both. So in both my no-hitters, ironically, the third baseman in the Cub no-hitter was Bobby Morgan. He made 2 plays on swinging bunts that saved a no-hitter. And in a Giant no-hitter, Robinson made a play on Willie Mays that I don't think any third baseman in the league could have made. It was a hard-hit ball to his left, but Jackie was so quick, and he picked that up on 1 hop and turned it into an easy out. So both my no-hitters were saved by the third baseman.
Wow. Also, another historical note, you could have been the pitcher with the shot heard around the world.
Oh, yeah, I've been asked about that 1,000 times. Well, I was in the bullpen with Ralph Branca, and when the phone rang, Newcomb was on the mound, and he had 2 men on base and a 2-run lead. We had a 2-run lead, 4-2. Well, they called the bullpen, manager Charlie Dressen, and I know what he must have asked our bullpen coach, Clyde Sukeforth, because Clyde's answer was, yes, sir, they're both throwing okay. And then he must have asked him, who's got the best stuff? And Sukeforth said, they're both throwing good, but Erskine's bouncing his curve sometime. And Dressen said, let me have Branca. So the second pitch Ralph threw was in the seats for the pennant and the whole thing. So I tongue-in-cheek say this. People say, Carl, you pitched 12 seasons to Big League. What was your best pitch? I said, I think it was a curveball I bounced in the bullpen in the Polo Grounds. Well, that's not hardly fair, but a couple of the writers over time, they said, everybody wonders what you'd have done if you brought Erskine in. And he said, I went back and looked and see, how did you pitch? What kind of luck did you have against Thompson? And so they said, well, you faced him 12 times. So this was early in my career, 51. I came up in 48. They said, they looked you up. You faced Thompson 12 times, and the last 3 times you faced him, you struck him out. I said, you know what? Let me tell you something. comes to mind. We didn't have the laptop in 1951.
Right.
If we'd had the laptop in 51, Dressen would have seen that I pitched pretty well against Thompson, and that might have been the difference. Well, that's really wild speculation, but they were stealing the signs. You know, the Giants were. They had a lot more ingenuity about stealing signs than the Astros did, hitting on a garbage can.
Yeah.
They had a buzzer system rigged up from a window in center field with a telescope and a buzzer system to the bullpen for the Giants, which was in right center. And if you stood at the plate, all you had to do was kind of look over the pitcher's right shoulder and you could see the bullpen. So they were stealing signs and using a towel on somebody in the bullpen, one of the catchers, would hold a towel on his lap, a white towel. And if it was a fastball, he didn't move the towel. If it was a breaking pitch, he'd pick it up and rub his hands or his face. And you could see that plain. You didn't have to turn your head or anything. So the Giants have been stealing signs the last half of the season. And so that was going on with Thompson. But he never admitted that he took the sign. He always said, well, yeah, I could have taken it if I'd wanted it. But did you take it? I could have if I wanted. He never would say he ever took it. But Ralph Branca, he kind of snuffed out before it ever came to light and before ever threw the pitch that he always thought that the Giants were stealing signs somehow. But we didn't figure out how, and so nobody ever, ever charged the Giants with stealing signs. So they ended up winning the pennant and not winning the series. But that was going on with Ralph going in to pitch to Thompson. Everybody now knows that Thompson probably took the sign and hit a bad pitch. Even he wouldn't have swung at that pitch if he'd been on his own. But a fastball was coming. He was cocked to hit it, and he did, even though it was up and in and kind of a bad pitch to swing at.
With no baseball right now, obviously, and everybody's looking forward to opening day, whenever that will be. Hopefully soon. Can you tell me? I know you've started an opening day game. What does that feel like? Is that just like another game to you, or is it a whole different feeling?
It is not. I'll tell you what it is. It's not spoken. It's not written. But you come out of spring training, and the manager has to decide who's the best pitcher, who's the most ready to start the season, because it's going now. Everything's for real. So if you're selected to pitch opening day, you take that as a badge of honor that you have come through spring training, and in the manager's judgment, you're his best pitcher on that day. So it is an honor to pitch opening day. And it's also a psychological kind of thing. You're thinking that, of all the pitchers we got, 10 or 11, I got to pitch the opening day. So I pitched, in my memory now, I'm thinking I pitched 5 opening days.
Oh, wow.
And I got to pitch opening day in Los Angeles, which was at the end of my career, and I was real surprised that Alston picked me to pitch the opener in the Coliseum in 1958 when we moved from Brooklyn. And we played the Giants that day, and about 80,000 in the stands. It was really, really a historical moment. And we had a wild game. We ended up winning 6-5. I got the win. Lamine bailed me out in the 8th inning, I think. And but I pitched another couple opening days in Brooklyn, and it's a specific honor to get selected.
Now, everybody who knows me, I'm a big Mets fan, and I've had an opportunity to talk to some players who played for Gil Hodges, and you played with Gil Hodges. Could you tell me a little bit about him and his shot to get into the Hall of Fame?
Well, number one, Gil was rated by everybody that knew anything about baseball, probably the top first baseman for a decade in the National League. Now, there are other good first basemen, too, but Hodges was a great defensive player. He had great range around first base, and he does something that doesn't get in the stats at all. When Pee Wee Reese, our shortstop and captain, made the Hall of Fame, there was always a tagline, and he also helped Jackie Robinson in his early years, talking about Pee Wee.
Mm-hmm.
When I write letters to the committee about Gil, I say, you can see the stats, but what you can't see is how Gil Hodges played right alongside Jackie Robinson on the other side, and he kept the peace on the field. Gil was really respected. If there was a fight breaking out around second base with Jackie, he was there right away, broke it up. And he protected Jackie a lot in those early 2 or 3 years. But that's not in a statistic anyplace. But the fact is, Gil not only put the numbers, I think, are Hall of Fame caliber numbers, but he also contributed in some other ways. Not only did he help Jackie in those early years, Gil was a smart player. Now, we all were surprised when he became a manager because he was such a passive personality, but he was strong. And Tom Seaver, a pitcher I respect a great deal, Tom Seaver talks a lot about Hodges and how tough he really was, but he wasn't loud.
Mm-hmm.
He got the message across double-fisted, but he didn't have to yell it out. And so I just think Hodges has somehow missed the vote. The story goes that Campanella, our catcher, was on the committee, as was Ted Williams. And Williams was not impressed with having another Dodger make it because he said, you're trying to get the whole team in the Hall of Fame. So he kind of nudged Hodges the other way. And Campanella, who was in a wheelchair when he was on this committee, one of the years he was not able to attend the meeting for the vote. So he sent in a written vote, and they wouldn't accept his vote because he was not present. And that was a key vote at that time for Hodges. And so all these strange things have happened. He's got voted high votes many times, but not quite enough. But then each time they vote again, he drops down some.
Mm-hmm.
He's got one more shot. I'm not sure when the Veterans Committee meet, but sometime this year, I believe, they meet, and he'll have his last chance to be voted in, and I'm guessing he'll make it.
Hopefully. I mean, all I hear is really great things from anybody from you now and from anybody who's played for him. So hopefully that's all we can
Hodges,
do.
You know, Hodges is remembered not for his great playing days, which were long. I don't remember exactly how many years, but it's probably 12 or 14 years. But he also managed successfully a World Series with your Mets back in '69. But the Hall of Fame committee standards will not vote you in on player and manager. You can make it as a player or you can make it as a manager. But the two together don't count. I think that's the wrong way to look at it, because what do you contribute to the game of baseball? Not just as a player, but if you managed as well, but they don't count it that way. So it didn't help Gil that he had great stats. Then he managed and died young, but he did get to a World Series with a team that was not expected to win the pennant even. So,
right, and he did so many things with that team. I mean, he utilized the different people at each position and subbing people in and out, and that was not really used a lot at that time. So he's done quite a bit.
Well, the famous shoe polish ball Hodges was smart. He was a smart manager and a very fair-minded handling of his staff, of his team. I never heard a bad mouth by anybody about Hodges. And I played with him for 12 seasons, so I know him really well. And he was a strong man, physically and character-wise, but he wasn't a loudmouth. And he was all you'd want in a pro player.
Nice. Carl, after you retired, you went into the insurance business?
Yeah, I had an agency because I didn't have to invest any money. I didn't have to travel.
Was it easy to transition from sports?
No, it was not. No, it took me a couple years to get a good feel of the business and to try to be a good professional, not just a salesman. And so there's need in the insurance industry for good professionals who take care of the client right, no matter what their the policy is or whatever. So I tried to be a real professional. It took me a couple years to get the hang of it, and then I had a good, successful agency. But a bank moved to town and invited me to be on the board, and eventually they invited me inside as an officer. And then I went through the chairs, and believe it or not, I was president for 11 years. So I had 3 careers after baseball, but I was very fortunate.
My last question, I think it's an important one too. Could you tell me about your work with the Special Olympics? Down in my area here, we have something called the Miracle League, where they built these almost like miniature ballparks, where anybody can go to play. You know, whatever disability you might have, you can go play baseball. And I mean, a lot of people look forward to it and helping out. But I know you've done a lot with the Special Olympics. Could you tell me about that?
Yes, I'm proud to do it too. Well, my son Jimmy, my 4th child, when I retired from baseball in 1960, Jimmy was born the next spring, and he was born Down syndrome. Only at that time it was called Mongolism, a very harsh term and kind of an indicator of how society accepted somebody afflicted with Down syndrome. So it got my wife and I very interested in that population that existed but was not in the mainstream because there was no schools and no services even for any, not just Down syndrome, but other birth defects that come. I asked somebody one day, is it still 3% of births that are affected by some form of disability? And they said, yeah, that number is holding pretty true, about 3%. Not all Down syndrome now, but anyway, Mrs. Shriver, who was a Kennedy Shriver, it was her brainchild to, as she put it, get these special needs people out of the stands where there's always been spectators and get them on the field and let them participate. Well, that was a wild idea to think people who had very little skills, hand-eye coordination, or sight, hearing, whatever, to participate in sports didn't make sense. Well, she tried it out in 1968 in Chicago for the first ever Special Olympics event. And from that time on, Special Olympics has grown worldwide. Mrs. Shriver used to call me and say, Carl, with your Jimmy, raising him, we'd like to have you as one of the special coaches who could speak to groups explaining how Special Olympics works and why it's an important thing to have. Well, she used to fly me around. I was retired now. It's in the early 60s. She used to fly me around the country, have me and other pro athletes speak about this new idea of Special Olympics. So one time she asked me to come to the Kennedy Center in Washington to speak to a group of probably potential donors. And so as I left the house, I took a World Series ring with me, and I took a gold medal that Jimmy had won in swimming. And I didn't know why. I just put my ring on, put the medal in my pocket. So during the few remarks I made at Kennedy Center, I showed the World Series ring. I said, I always thought this was the highest thing you could achieve a World Series ring? Are you kidding? Jackie Robinson and all of us were like little boys getting this ring. Could anything top that? And then I pulled out this gold medal that Jimmy won in swimming. And I said, Jimmy was never supposed to compete in sports. Can you imagine him winning a 50-meter freestyle in swimming? So which was the greater achievement? You know, we were all pros. We were supposed to win. People like Jimmy were never supposed to compete. So which one do you think is the greatest achievement? So Mrs. Shriver said, oh, my goodness, you got to tell that story in Chicago next week, and then we're going to go to St. Louis. And so she used to take me in a private plane, fly me around to tell that story. So I've been real active, along with my wife, Betty, in Special Olympics for, well, Jimmy is 60 years old, and he started when he was 10.
Wow.
So he's a 50-year veteran of Special Olympics. And in a simple explanation, I think Special Olympics has told us what we should have all known and should have all been guided by. Special Olympics shows how much you can get out of what you've been given. Those who compete in Special Olympics, as opposed to real Olympics, the real Olympics, the gold medalist, the silver medalist almost apologizes that he didn't win the gold. In Special Olympics, when 6 runners are on the end line, there's a first, a second, a third, and a fourth, and a fifth. Who gets the biggest hand? The 6th place runner, because they recognize this person is struggling to make it down the line and finally does. And when he hits the end line, he gets a bigger hand than first place because it's the essence of Special Olympics, getting the most out of what you've been given. That's the yardstick we all should use.
Absolutely. I mean, that's a great lesson for anybody.
Anyway, Special Olympics has proven again that the sports field has lots of life lessons, and Special Olympics really has a lot of them.
Wonderful. How's Jimmy doing now?
Jimmy's doing well. We're on this lockdown, and he can't visit us, but he comes to our patio. We live in a little villa in a retirement village. He comes to our patio door, which is a glass door, and we can't open the door, but we see him and talk to him. He talks to us, and his mother gives him about 15 kisses through the glass. But that's how we handle that, and Jimmy's doing very well.
Awesome. Well, hopefully we're going to be done with this soon, so we all can get back to normal.
Absolutely. Well, I don't know if we ever.
Well,
I don't know
as normal as can
is
be.
anymore.
Yes.
Right. Yeah. Well, let's hope that the deaths subside and the virus is captured and we can open up again. And this wonderful country was going so well before this happened, but we all have to face it alike, and challenges keep coming.
Yeah, that's it. Well, Mr. Erskine, I appreciate it. I mean, I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to me.
Well, you're very welcome, and always appreciate the call.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I'll talk to you soon, and stay safe.
Same for you. Thank you.
Thanks, Carl.
Bye-bye.